Athlete Helpline. Perfect, thank you. This is a partnership between the Courage First Athlete Helpline, which, if you don't know, is a call, text, chat line under the Child's Help National Child Abuse Hotline and the Foundation for Global Sports Development. It is for parents, coaches, students, anyone who is looking for any sort of questions or has concerns about abuse or mental health in sports. It runs Monday through Friday, 12 to 8 p.m. Pacific time, and there's counselors trained in crisis response, psychoeducational resources. They can provide emotional support regarding anything concerning in the sports community. So we have partnered with Coach Beyond, and Dr. Reynolds here from Ball State University is going to take it away as the moderator, and he's gonna jump into some bios on our panelists today and also talk about Coach Beyond a little bit before we get started.
All right. Well, thank you, Kathy, for the wonderful introduction, and welcome everybody today. My name is Dr. Jerry Reynolds. I'm an assistant professor of social work at Ball State University. I'm also the president of the Alliance of Social Workers in Sports, which I'll be wrapping up here at the end of the month. And also, we are fortunate at Ball State that we have a grant, a statewide grant, and we are partnering with the Ohio State University's Life Sports program, and doing a lot of coaching education, and in the state, but also really not just about, the X's and O's of coaching, but really like what are some of the challenges that coaches may face, and really empowering coaches. Our goal is to educate 7,500 coaches in the next year or so across the state. And there are similar programs now taking place in Kansas and Maryland. So you may hear about Coach Beyond in other states as well besides Ohio. And I just wanted to say also thank you in advance to our panelists who will be with us today. And just to also keep in mind that there may be some sensitive topics that are shared today. So if, just be mindful of that. And if you do need to excuse yourself, please, make sure that you take care of what are, personal needs that you may have at that time. And also just what we're going to do is I'm going to have the panelists give a brief introduction, and then also what brings them here today. And then what we'll do is we do have some guiding questions that will guide the discussion today as we talk about reporting and athlete rights. Before we get started, though, introducing our panelists, why are we here? There's some general statistics on athlete rights. Basically 69% of athletes are not aware that they had rights as children in sports. 93% of athletes have reported that they experienced sexual harassment or unwanted contact and did not file a complaint or report it. 68% of athletes who experienced unwanted sexual contact or harassment indicated that they did not feel that they had a place to talk about their experiences within their governing body of sport. And 18.1% of individuals having unwanted sexual experiences indicate that they were retaliated against while speaking out. So there's definitely a lot of challenges, as you can see, embedded within the topic. And basically our job today is to learn about how we can empower athletes. So I guess I'll start first. Madison, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, thank you. I'm super excited to be here today. My name is Madison Smith. I am the communications manager for We Ride Together. We are a nonprofit dedicated to ending sexual abuse in youth and amateur sports. We believe that everyone has the right to learn, play, and compete without fear of abuse. I am also an Indiana alum, so very glad to have that connection to the Hoosier State. Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug.
Yeah, I'm Doug Fearberg. I've been practicing law for about 35 years. I was an all-state wrestler in the state of Michigan and wrestled briefly at the University of Michigan, long enough to be assaulted by Dr. Anderson. I've been representing kids who've been hurt or killed or hazed in sports and at schools and in programs nationally for more than 30 years. And seen a lot on that road, and have experienced. My connection right now to Indiana is that I'm suing Butler University over the sexual abuse suffered by 4 of their female soccer athletes. So I wish I had a better connection to Indiana, but I don't. So
Well,
that's why
thank
I'm
you
here.
for working, with those athletes. That's really, really important work. Anita.
Good morning. I'm Anita Daniels. I am a licensed clinical sports social worker in North Carolina. I serve professional and collegiate athletes. I'm licensed in North Carolina, Indiana, and Florida. So I serve the pros and collegiate, and I've been in private practice now for 22 years. Happy
Great.
to be here.
Thanks so much, Anita. And Shay, you're a panelist as well.
I am. Good to be here. My name is Shay Painter. I am the operations manager for Child Help's National Child Abuse Hotline. And I was also an athlete in college.
Well, great. Thank you for being here today. All right. I think we might have one more joining us here momentarily.
We have Sarah here. I
yeah,
think she's
Sarah.
connecting to audio right now.
Yeah.
I'll mention that Shay is also a professor at Grand Canyon State University, and she previously did all of the mandated reporting training within Maricopa County in Arizona for police, teachers, and a bunch of different child-facing professionals. So
Nice.
she has a lot of great things to contribute.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right.
See. They're still connecting.
Yeah.
Okay. We can probably jump in, and then when she's on,
Yeah.
maybe take a
No
little
worries. That's
second.
fine.
Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you,
So the first question we have for the panelists, just need to pull it up here. All right. One of the things we're going to focus first on reporting. Describe for us what constitutes an inappropriate situation that is reportable.
Madison, you look like you're ready to jump in. Do you want to do it?
Well, I just think that's such a meaty question. And I'm imagining that Doug, with your law background, that's also like I'm guessing that what's going through your head right now is it depends.
Yes, it does.
It's just that it completely depends on even like what sport we're talking about. It's just
Where, what
so
the- yeah.
broad. Where, yeah, exactly. Are we talking about an athlete that's covered by Safe Sport? Are we talking about an athlete that's in university or high school or and therefore is covered by Title IX? Or are we unfortunately talking about an athlete who completely falls outside of the scope of both of those things? So,
Well, I think you've definitely hit on some of the highlights, definitely some good areas, and I think that that's really important that you're sharing, like, certainly, context and environment matters. So
Yeah,
what would you
and-
all building on that?
Well, and I would also say, I mean, the circumstances can be so broad that if you're looking at a young athlete in an adult situation, there are certain other red flags that, come up that are different, and it's really very dependent upon what you've seen. As some state regulations require mandatory reporting on certain things that you may have witnessed or think you've seen, whereas, other conduct falls outside of that. If it's, within safe sport and it's bullying and it's, maybe inappropriate comments that are, emotionally abusive or things like that. But I would say the consequences for not reporting and getting that wrong are severe. So for someone that is got that question in their head, I think they should spend some time really thinking it through and figuring it out so they come out on the right end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other panelists want to contribute?
I'll go ahead and jump in there. I think it gets tricky, especially state by state. Every state has different laws. But if you go ahead and put in Google, mandated reporting statute for Arizona, Indiana, whatever it is, it's going to pop up in all of its glory. Now, laws, unfortunately, can be a little bit tricky to read, and that can be hard, but you're going to have it there. And so you're going to have in that state, what exactly am I required to report? And typically, required reports are going to be physical abuse, sexual abuse of a minor. So if it's going to be those two situations, you're going to look at a report at pretty much every time. Outside of that scope, when we look at emotional abuse, things of that nature, I always go on the side of caution of when in doubt, call it out, because you're looking at your own liability as a mandated reporter. However, that can get dicey because you don't want to ruin rapport with athletes who are confiding in you. So I always go to the law first and then kind of backtrack from there.
Okay.
And I agree with that completely, that where it becomes a grayer area is like, because as you're talking about abuse, a lot of the abuse starts with grooming.
Right.
And particularly given what that athlete relationship may be. And so, yeah, you may not have seen sexual abuse, but you may have seen something that seems off because it's en route to that. And what do you do with that? Now, you may not be legally bound to report it because you did not witness sexual abuse and you don't yet know that it is sexual abuse. But being wrong and not reporting that can have serious consequences. So it's a really complicated question, but one that coaches and adults and people involved need to take very seriously, because even as Shay, you're saying, you may have athletes confiding in you and be in a bit of a bind as to whether or not to destroy that relationship or abuse that relationship or abuse that trust too.
Absolutely.
I was
And
going to
go ahead,
piggyback
Anita. I'm
on
sorry.
that just because in Florida, social workers are required to report. It's not optional. And if we don't report and there's a situation associated with us as clinicians or professionals, there's a fine, $5,000. And so I'm fortunate that the athletes that I work with in Florida have not presented any kinds of cases, but it's required for children and adults. So it doesn't matter. Um, so I think it depends on the state. I like the mandated state reporting requirements, but in Florida, you are required or you will be fined, and it's a felony.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just wanted to
Go.
mention really quick.
We all have a lot of thoughts on this. Sorry, Madison. You.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say really quick also that sometimes the person reporting is actually the victim, and that just hasn't been brought up. And in that situation, it's really, really important to understand what you're getting yourself into. And there's lots of really great resources to understand what those processes look like. Unfortunately, for survivors, reporting can often be really re-traumatizing. No one wants it to be like that, but unfortunately, that is the reality. At We Ride Together, we have a Know Your Rights series and a Justice Pathways for Athletes series that was very generously advised on by Doug's Law Group, that I would really encourage survivors to look at if they are considering going through the Title IX or Safe Sport processes. But understanding what those look like is really, really important because it's a really big decision. It eats up a lot of your time, and it's a big commitment. So knowing what you're getting yourself into, knowing who's going to be representing you, knowing if you have the financial resources for it, it's a lot. It's not always necessarily fair, not necessarily in the legal sense, but in the like karmic sense, it doesn't always feel fair. So knowing for victims what you're getting into, I think is really, really important.
Okay. Thank you. And kind of building on this question, um, Anita, you mentioned a little bit about this, like about, actually you mentioned a lot about this of, if reporting is delayed or you don't know what to do, and if you delay reporting, there are some consequences. Um, what constitutes a reasonable expectation or time regarding reporting for our panelists?
Well, in thinking about the client first, at least as I said, I haven't had that situation in Florida. I have had a unique kind of situation in North Carolina, and the client and I worked together to determine the best way to address it. Um, the client chose to report because in North Carolina, I'm not necessarily required like I am in Florida. But the client chose to report, which I admire the client for being able to do that. Had to go to court, all of those things. But I think it worked out best that the client felt comfortable being the one to report, not just to share with me, but also feeling comfortable reporting. Um, and that's to me what's critical is helping that client know um, that I'm going to support you and how you choose to address this, and I'm prepared to share whatever information you would like for me to share. Um, so it happened pretty quickly in North Carolina, but in Florida, I would not have had an option. So I'm thankful so far I haven't had to experience that in Florida. But I think pretty
Yeah.
quickly. Mhm.
I think it's important to make the differentiation in this conversation between children, when coaches are the mandated reporters or anyone working with children, versus adults, athletes, when it is up to them to be able to make the report themselves. So, yeah, just making sure that, people who work with children understand what their mandated reporting job is and what those state laws are, as Shay said. I know the question's talking about how professionals can address a situation they're unsure about reporting. I just wanted to go back to the original, I don't know, that first question, and this was on my mind this whole time about you will probably never regret reporting, but you might regret not reporting. So that's what's always in my mind is, am I going to regret not reporting, or am I going to report and be like, oh, nothing happened. Oh, well. But that regret system about if something did happen and you didn't report is something to think about there. So sorry about jumping in. Definitely came onto my mind.
Well, and
Thank
I would
you.
just,
Yeah.
and Kathy, I would just say that I want to say follow up on that and say one other point too. But I mean, that's critically important because if you're wrong, you have so many circumstances where not only did that athlete, if it's a younger athlete too, suffer additional abuse, not only did that athlete not get an opportunity to get counseling and get intervention, but others may have been abused as well. The one thing I do want to say about the reasonableness of reporting is, that it opens up a question as to what truly is reasonable, because so much of the dialogue that we have about sexual misconduct is often jaded by age-old notions. So we hear things like, well, she waited a week to report, or she delayed reporting for 2 months. All that dialogue is to me wrong. The time for an individual to be reporting is so dependent upon who they are and what they're able to do. And I rail against references to, well, they delayed or they didn't do this, because I mean, just as was noted earlier by Madison, the consequences sometimes for reporting are so intense and out of the control of the survivor and maybe not within their power to report, that we need to be careful in the language we use when we talk about the timing.
And I think with timing, it's, yes, with the victim or the survivor, I don't believe in anything a delayed report, I think that that's non-existent for the survivor, right? When a survivor is making that report. When it comes to being a coach and being a mandated reporter, there is a time frame and there
Absolutely.
is a reasonable time. You know, in Arizona, we have what's called reasonable immediacy. So there is no 24, 72-hour law. It's as soon as you are able, you need to report. So when I trained in Arizona, various professionals, it was before you go to bed at night, before your head hits the pillow, you need to make a report. And the reason for that is, heaven forbid something happened to that child while you're sleeping. And then, you know, it gets wind that the victim told you. And so you're going to have to now answer some very uncomfortable questions to law enforcement as to why you chose not to report that information. So I think sooner the better. And we kind of go back to law when you're the mandated reporter and there's a child at, you know, at risk. What does your state's law say? And Kathy brought up a good point as adults versus children. And sometimes you get mandated for adults. For example, I had an 18-year-old come to me and disclose I was sexually assaulted by my father from the ages of 12 to 15. And the reason that that disclosure was coming up now is because her little sister just turned 12, right? And so now we have a current child that's at risk, which then triggers a mandate. So that all gets convoluted as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm really appreciating, like, just from the discussion, like the variance of viewpoints in the sense of like different perspectives that are going on right now, because like this is really enlightening to me, because it's like it's context, it's situation, it's, you know, what are the laws of the state, but also like there, you know, and I think one of the reasons I brought up that question about reasonable is it's like, you know, there's obviously, you know, variance within that too. And I think that that's what we're really trying to stress is that, and in a way, I'm glad these questions are open, a little more open-ended, because it's drawing out the dialogue, and we're seeing the complexity, but also the importance and necessity of what, you know, what we need to do in these situations. The next thing I wanted to ask is, just in terms of, barriers to reporting abuse, what would you say are, in your experience, what are some of the greatest barriers to reporting abuse?
I think stigma is a huge barrier to reporting. Athletes want to continue to practice their sport. And when abuse is perpetrated, it's almost always by someone in a position of power. Like Doug mentioned earlier, grooming almost always happens before the actual abuse. And they have to see that person at their next horse show or swim meet or dance recital. Or if they do report, they have to deal with retaliation from community members who like blame them for their own abuse. And at We Ride Together, we have a Survivor Stories platform, and we see time and time again that when athletes do report, they are horribly mistreated by their athletic communities, even when they like aren't the only victim of that perpetrator. And survivorship is so stigmatized that it often forces athletes out of sport, and that dissuades other victims from coming forward about abuse that they've also experienced.
Absolutely true. And I'll throw another layer into it because I mean, as Madison's saying it, what you're going to report the coach? Well, the coach is likely some beloved person within the community that coached, you know, for the last 15 years. And yeah, that's going to cause a big swing in the community's view of what's going on. I will also say, you know, when you then get down in the weeds in some litigation, like even what's happening at Butler University, these are technically adult athletes. And while they reported and went through Title IX anonymously using pseudonyms, when it came time to pursue their rights in civil court, the university is trying to out their names. So, you know, you can feel that stigma and you can feel some of the retaliation, and you can feel like all you wanted to do was compete. And now look what's happened. And I'm out of my sport. I'm being stigmatized. I'm gonna, if they're able to publish my name, the first thing everybody's going to know about me is going to be that. And I don't control my own agency anymore. I don't control how people meet me and how they come to know me. So those are some barriers.
Jerry, you're muted.
Sorry. It's not just only those, those individual factors, but it's those social factors as well. Like y'all have mentioned it, and I've heard like kind of what's the coach in the community's reputation? What is the individual's reputation? In outside of athletics, I mean, and you said it's like there's almost like this, it 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 I would even argue it's an identity issue in the sense that it reshapes that athlete's identity as well. And I mean, I could spend all day talking about that in a different context, but this is just another factor that can contribute to, certainly at minimum, a loss of identity.
Yeah, and what we also seen examples where sports teams have canceled their programs for seasons, depending upon the type of abuse or hazing or sexual hazing and things of that nature, where you're just done. You've seen it at Northwestern, you saw it at the hockey team in Vermont, you've seen it in different places. I mean, there are serious consequences that run through people's minds. So, and not all that can be easily controlled.
Did anybody else want to offer some perspectives on barrier, what they perceive as a barrier to reporting?
The other thing that I will add is sometimes even family members, parents not wanting to be the ones to um, report or have their child or student report, because then it's going to be a reflection on them. How did you not know that this was happening? So I've even seen some of those kinds of cases where parents have been feeling like they've been outed, like this was happening to your child and you didn't know. So I think parents would sometimes prefer to figure out how to keep things um, under the surface if they can, which is not fair to the athlete, their child, when those instances occur.
Yeah. And we also have another panelist joining us. Sarah, did you want to briefly introduce yourself?
You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. My name is Sarah Giesel, and from like the flyer that you saw, I'm a family physician with obstetrics. I work up in Olympia, Washington, and I was a student athlete for all 4 years out of Johns Hopkins, where I played soccer, and so NCAA and athletes was very near and dear to my heart. And then right now, as a clinician, I have a sort of the authority as well as the sort of, I guess, yeah, I would say that, that if anybody were to come in my office that plays sports and stuff like that, when we do our physicals and everything, we have mandatory reporting depending on age things, and we have to contact authorities if somebody comes through like the ED. There's a lot of like steps that we have to do, and what we're trying to do is make our athletes and kids really familiar with other ways that they can get in contact with people if they are in need, because coming to their clinician, if they're not comfortable with it, or if their parents having to go to the appointments, these sort of organizations and ways that they can sort of advocate for themselves are crucially important for some of our population. So that's something that I'm trying to get in my practice with doing when I do sports physicals in particular, or if anybody who comes through the ED or something like that, that they understand that there are a lot of other resources than just other adult figures that might be present in front of them.
Yeah, thank you. And also just in I don't know if you heard the last question, but what and it sounds like you're really trying to streamline and developing a protocol. What are some of the greatest barriers that, whether expected or unexpected, to reporting that you've encountered in your line of work?
So if I'm in the emergency department, I think the big thing is it's always like we have to be delicately keep people present and keep them there long enough to get a hold of authorities and sort of make formal reports depending on age. And so age is different between states. And so that's also been a really big problem is the ED has very long waits. So how long can you wait somebody with something that this might be going on with them? And then in the formal setting of like the hospitals and stuff, when we try to make protocols and have it be official procedures, it has to start at the top. And when you have to go from the top at a huge corporation like the hospital that I work with, that's all over the Pacific Northwest, every single level head person has to approve it, and the verbiage as it goes down just gets watered down. And then at the time that it actually gets to the people who are the ones that are giving these resources to those, it's actually not in the way that you wish to be, but you can't be out of compliance. So I think that our biggest barrier is it's long wait times to get a hold of authorities if we're in the acute setting, but then in the outpatient setting to actually follow quote protocols, we run into a lot of problems with the upper and the leadership because it's very bureaucratic and it's not like scripted, like we'll have to read scripts. Everything has to be templated. If I put something in a medical record, then it becomes like part of that person's sort of record for life. And what is going to happen if they were a teen and they turn 18, what happens with their records. So it's some of these conversations that when you're trying to have a peer-to-peer, it does not translate well when you have a peer to CEO. So
Yeah.
those are my two big barriers.
Yeah, and you mentioned that it's not just, and you mentioned two things, like sort of it change, clearly changing, but also like still maintaining compliance as it works its way through the bureaucracy.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely something, to keep in mind, and how something may look very different from when it starts to when it's actually put into place. I'm going to transition here a little bit for our panelists. And we're going to spend about 15 minutes talking about the rights or rights of those who've reported the abuse, but also the rights of the accused. Just to open up the first question, what are the rights of those who have reported the abuse?
Madison, you want to talk about Title IX or the Safe Sport and some of those?
Yeah, well, again, this is like that first question, right? Oh, this sun in my apartment is getting really aggressive. This is one of those things that is incredibly dependent on what reporting entity. This question is also incredibly dependent on what you mean by person who reported the abuse. Do you mean the victim, or do you mean like we've been talking a lot about the mandatory reporter? If you mean a victim in the Title IX or Safe Sport process, there are quite a few safeguards put in place. And I would actually really encourage people who are interested to go read those Know Your Rights guides that I put in the chat. Because, first of all, it would just be really boring to listen to me sit here for 10 minutes and talk about all the rights that you have in those processes if you're a complainant. And second of all, off the top of my head, that's just a lot to remember. But in general, you have the right to an investigation. You have the right to have your sexual history taken out of the equation in Title IX, which I think is something really, really important for especially, I think, college athletes to know. I'm a recent college grad. I graduated in 2023. I was very, very involved in campus advocacy, and I remember that this was something that girls came to me asking about a lot. So I want to make sure that people know that. But yeah, I would really encourage people to actually go and skim through those guides. But yeah, again, it really depends on what reporting entity. If you're reporting to the authorities, that's completely different. And then again, if you're a third party reporting on behalf of someone, I would defer to other panelists on that one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in both the safe sport and the Title IX circumstances, there are extensive procedures to comport with what's identified as due process that sets forth the rights of the reporting party in that circumstance, the survivor, to be free from retaliation, to be in a confidential hearing, to have an investigation, to have it move reasonably, I say reasonably promptly. It can't be, they can't be deliberately indifferent to what is going on. It's a pretty high standard, or a low standard, depending on what side of the equation you're on. You know, to an outcome and to be protected. It's very similar to safe sport in that regard. So there's not a ton of policies set out to protect, say, a coach that might have reported something or a third party adult who's reported something. I don't think we see often percolating up in the system lots of well, we see retaliation, but we don't see it hitting the legal system as much as maybe some forms of lawsuits involving, you know, saying that you're wrong and saying that you've engaged in libel or defamation or something of the sort. But other than that, we don't see a lot of conflict in, you know, an adult that maybe got it wrong but was trying to do the right thing.
Yeah. Any others have thoughts they want to share?
We'll say seems like you're gonna go to the next question. What about the accused? Um, you know, as a result of Me Too and a result of a lot of different things, what we've seen is, you know, a men's movement. There's a number of lawyers that are out there that specialize in representing men accused of engaging in sexual misconduct. We're in fact being sued by one such man at Yale University with 13 other female advocacy groups. You know, but ultimately they're entitled to a form of due process, very similar to what's the survivors entitled to. And that's where there's been a lot of push on behalf of the accused to have due process, to be able to cross-examine the survivor in the proceedings. And that's a heavily litigated issue right now out in because there are a number of advocacy groups as well that are willing to fund, and it's mostly men who claim they've been wrongly accused and wrongly mistreated in the process of either Title IX proceedings or in the context of safe sport.
Yeah, and just to sort of piggyback off that, I just think it's really important to add into this conversation that false allegations are exceedingly rare.
Yeah.
It's incredibly unlikely. And there is absolutely a constitutional right to due process, especially going through that criminal system. There's a really fabulous book that I would recommend for anyone who's interested in it called Sexual Justice. It's by Alexander Brodsky, about this exact issue that I loved because I am just a nerd about this stuff. But if someone discloses to you, it is not your place to say, well, he's always been really nice to me. Or, well, I've been alone with him and it hasn't happened to me. False allegations are exceedingly rare. It's also not your place to investigate. If you are a coach or a teacher or whatever, it is your place to provide resources, mandatory report if that is something that is required of you by law, and then provide support. Put your feelings in a bucket and do what you can to help that survivor. But false allegations are incredibly, incredibly, incredibly rare. And I think there is a cultural idea that they're much more common than they are.
And I really appreciate what both of you are saying about how there's, sort of this, I guess, men's movement, but also, the fact that false allegations are extremely rare. And I think that, that is something that we have to keep in mind, especially as we're working in these settings and kind of navigating what do we do, how do we act. And I think that's always at least what I'm hearing, like that's a great starting point to know that yes, there is this countercultural movement that, and there's lots of challenges going on with that right now. And at the same time, there is the false allegations are extremely rare.
Yeah, I will say, like, just so people can see it in real time.
Yeah.
One of the issues that got our law firm sued for filing an amicus brief is the question was, can a woman report, I don't want this to be a woman, can someone report in confidential Title IX proceedings that they are a survivor of sexual assault and not be subjected to a defamation action by the respondent? Those are confidential proceedings. Can you make that allegation and not be subject to a defamation action? And a lot of people would say, for sure, you should be able to do that because you can do it in court and you have a judicial privilege. This is a quasi-court proceeding, but what door do you open up if you allow people to immediately sue? So it would be someone who had money to find a lawyer and immediately sue a survivor for defamation and put them in that position. And, those are more recent phenomena as a result of a lot of different movements that are taking place in the country to push back on some of these things. So.
And you bring up defamation, and I think that's a good point. And you kind of brought it up in the previous question with third-party reports. And I kind of want to touch back on that is because I know that this is going to be going out to a lot of like coaches and people that would be third-party reporters. And so I want to let it be known that most states do have what's called reporter immunity, because that is a huge barrier that I get when educating mandated reporters. They go, well, if I get it wrong, can I get sued? Can I, is it defamation? And the answer is no, it's built in. However, you can't get on Facebook and say, the Smith family is abusing their children. You can't do that, right? But if you're reporting to the proper authorities, there is built-in immunity, because I think that whole we're in the sue happy culture in society, and so we all don't want to get involved because of, oh, I'm going to get sued.
And what do you view as the greatest challenge area with regard to the rights of individuals impacted by abuse? Is it just not, like, example, not knowing immunity, things like that of reporters? No.
Doug, do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
Well, I mean, I was going to say it's a big category, so it's getting justice, because that is not an easy process. Depending on the circumstances, depending on the defendant, depending on the levels of proof, depending on the biases against primarily women and survivors of sexual abuse, it can be a long slog to get justice. It's one of those circumstances where obviously the survivor has to fasten her seatbelt. But at the end of that tunnel can be an incredibly rewarding experience. That's a lifetime of change. You had talked earlier, Jerry, about identity. What justice can do for one's identity and sense of self-worth is just phenomenal, because the obstacles are real, the fear is real, the drama is as real as it gets for a young person. I mean, the first young people that I started representing were suddenly in an adult world that they knew nothing about. with adult lawyers, mostly middle-aged men who've sold their soul, defending the individuals. And those are the circumstances they're facing. And to stand up to that and come out on the end, having not blinked, having done what many athletes do, which is to face that with as much gusto or strength as they can, and come out on the end of that, it's a lifelong lesson. But those are real obstacles because it doesn't just happen.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think in addition to that, one of the greatest challenges with regards to the rights of athletes is straight up knowing they have rights. I grew up as an equestrian. I'm still an equestrian. It's a very small insular sport. In a sport like that, and I imagine in most other sports, things that feel off or weird or icky or bad, but don't necessarily ever cross the line into like a full-blown crime or full-blown physical abuse. You don't ever necessarily think about them as something that violates your rights. And so you hear stories of, a creepy handsy coach, or you have an emotionally abusive trainer, and you don't know that that violates your rights. And so many athletes don't even know that certain behavior is prohibited under specifically safe sport, or is prohibited under Title IX because it creates a hostile environment. So I think that like broadening awareness that athletes even have rights, and then acceptance of athletes actually standing up for those rights, like Doug was saying, in the justice system is super key.
Thank you. Any others want to contribute before we open it up to the audience for questions? Okay. Well, audience members, if you'd like to, you can either turn on your screen and ask the panelists a question, or you can put it in the chat, whatever you prefer. We'll go ahead and open up the floor.
Hi, I have a question. So in light of the recent political climate with a number of highly placed figures who have been accused or adjudicated to have committed sexual abuse or some kind of sexual crimes, I'm wondering what you see as what might be the effect on young people in the next few years who are facing similar situations, and how we can perhaps prepare to support them.
I feel bad because I am talking a lot and I don't want to take the mic away from anyone if they also would like to answer this. But I just feel like I remember when Roe was overturned, I was still in college, and I was very involved in campus advocacy. And something that was really, really useful, I guess, and like really felt validating for us was just that like acknowledgement that what we were feeling, and that like despondence and that feeling of just like we felt abandoned, and that feeling was valid, and I think a lot of the instinct, I live in DC now, so I'm around this like quite a bit. I think a lot of the instinct, especially from older people, can be, well, we've been here before and we've gotten through it and it's been fine. And I don't think that's always true. I think that's true for many people, but I think that actually lots of people don't get through it. Lots of people aren't fine. And so letting people um, letting people feel that anger, letting people express that anger, letting people organize, um, letting people express their hurt, um, I think is really critical. And just like validating those feelings. A lot of the times when young people are saying like things that might sound um, maybe a little bit dramatic to older ears, they just want you to tell them that you understand.
I think there's a very big responsibility on men as a result of what's taken place. Men are not, men are not safe in so many respects. And I think, Melissa, that's sort of what your comment suggesting is that not only have they not, are many of them not safe, there's no consequences, you know? And I feel not only, I mean, individually outside of my profession, but in this world in which we are, that men speaking up and men creating examples that show that they can be safe and understand the rights and advocate for those rights are critically important. They have been to a lot of the folks that I've represented. Just as Madison mentioned the Roe versus Wade, and the discussions were all, are women going to unite against this? I mean, I sort of want to say, WTF, what about the men? I mean, I know dozens of men that benefited, but, or whatever, were involved in what Roe offered. And the idea that it's been placed on women is uniquely unfair. And I think there's a responsibility on men. And so I would say, in response to your question, men should be out there talking. Men should be involved in creating safe spaces and showing that there's responsibility for misconduct and that they believe in that inherently. Haven't seen many do it yet.
Thank you for that. And I would agree as well, just definitely what, it's about, how can you counter the narrative and challenge those voices, and what's going to be the way that those voices are challenged.
And men doing some of the things that, we've been trained to do is wrestling. I mean, I was trained to ass kick. Okay. I mean, that was basically what it came down to, either getting your ass kicked or kicking somebody's ass. And, kicking ass on behalf of people that deserve to have that type of representation is critically important, because it does tend to change things. It does change circumstances where some things might have been permitted over the years and they're not now. I mean, post Nassar, significant changes. Post a lot of these circumstances, significant changes, even if at the top in another part of the legal system, things are still going wrong.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Melissa. Are there any others who probably have time for two more questions? You can either turn your camera on, or you can pop it in the chat if you'd like. Okay, I'll give it another 30 seconds, and if anybody else doesn't have a question, I'll turn it back over to Kathy.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment because I've been pretty quiet today for a lot of different reasons, but I do want to say this is a very, very tough topic. And for a lot of different reasons. And I appreciate everyone being here to learn more about it. I appreciate all of the resources that have been shared with us. Even with what I know, I've learned some new things myself today. But I just want to thank everyone for their commitment, for their honesty, for their transparency. This is a tough topic. I feel like someone's sitting in my chest. That's just how tough this topic has been for me. But I appreciate everyone for being here and sharing because it is a very tough topic. And I have had athletes who have been through some tough experiences. So just thank you for your care and concern.
Thank you so much, Anita, for sharing that. Really appreciate it. Catherine.
Yeah. Anita, also, thank you for closing us out with that. I think that was a great summary, actually, of what we talked about today. And thank you so much to the panel as well. We really appreciate all your insight and participation in this important topic. This recording will be posted on the Courage First Athlete Help Site website under resources. And that website is www.athletehelpline.org. And it will be distributed by Ball State throughout their Coach Beyond program. So if anyone has any questions after this, feel free to contact me for any Courage First Athlete Helpline information. You can contact Dr. Reynolds regarding any Coach Beyond information, and we can put those emails in the chat as well. I also want to talk about our next panel, which is in January on the 14th at the same time, and that'll be our last one in this series. And that one is on athlete mental health. We have a few former professional athletes and former Olympians joining us. So that's going to be a great one as well. And then some of our panelists today will also be on that panel in January. So again, really, really appreciate everyone's participation on the panel. I really appreciate the audience for jumping in here and listening and asking some good questions. And thank you so much for logging on.
Thank you very
Thank you
much,
guys so
everyone.
much.
Have a great rest of the day.